Mark's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. "Get out of my house." The words, cold and final, landed on me heavier than I ever imagined. I stood in the living room, hands resting loosely by my sides, but inside a fire burned fiercely, a mix of sorrow and disbelief that gnawed at my chest. My heart fractured in silence, but I forced my face into a mask of calm, unwilling to show the wound that those simple words inflicted. Around me, the faded wallpaper and old photographs watched silently, reminders of a life Maria and I had built brick by brick. The house that had once been full of laughter now felt foreign. My gaze drifted involuntarily to the stack of unopened mail on the coffee table, bills, bank letters, tuition notices from years ago. Each paper echoed the sacrifices I had made for Mark, sacrifices I had carried quietly so he could pursue his dreams without burden. I recalled the long nights fixing that furnace when the cold crept in.
The extra hours at work to make ends meet, the steady grind that kept us afloat. All for this moment, being cast aside by the very son I had raised with hope and love. The bitterness clawed at my throat, sharp and unrelenting. Mark's face held no warmth, only a cold disdain that was impossible to ignore. The boy who once sprinted to me with scraped knees and endless questions had vanished, replaced by someone I barely recognized. His arrogance was starker than ever, and I understood then that this wasn't a sudden rage or misunderstanding. This was betrayal, deliberate and cruel. I swallowed back the sting forming in my eyes and looked away, refusing to let him see my weakness. Pride ran deep in me, even now. Though hurt, I was not defeated. The years of patience and generosity I had poured into my family wouldn't yield so easily. My footsteps echoed softly on the worn floor as I quietly gathered a few essentials: an old coat,
A battered briefcase holding the last pieces of my life within these walls. As I turned toward the door, the weight of leaving was more than physical. It felt as if I was walking away from everything I had believed in. The reflection that caught me in the hallway mirror showed a man battered but standing, lines of grief softened by a new, hard resolve. I pressed my palm against the door's cold surface, a last contact with a place that had been my refuge and my battleground. The door was closed firmly behind me, but inside, a stubborn ember flickered to life. Outside, the autumn wind tugged at my coat, the indifference of the world a stark contrast to the turmoil within. Yet, beneath the loss, beneath the raw ache, I felt a steady flame of determination. I was forced out, yes, but I would not be undone. The door might be shut for now, but it was not locked forever. One day it would open again on my terms. Justice demanded more than silent acceptance. It called for reckoning. Though I stepped forward into the cold, uncertain air of exile, I carried with me a vow, soft but unbreakable. Arrogance must be punished. Betrayal must be answered. And I would be the one to restore balance, even if it had to burn everything down to do so. The room I found myself in was modest and austere, a rented attic space above a bustling corner store. Its thin walls did little to muffle the distant clatter of city life, a hum of engines and footsteps that seemed worlds away from the quiet torment inside. In that small enclave of solitude, I was left alone with my thoughts, submerged in a sea of memories as relentless as the waves crashing unseen beyond the urban horizon. I sat heavily on the creaking wooden chair that barely held the weight of years spent carrying emotional burdens far heavier than the body could bear. The silence of the room stretched and pressed around me, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions that threatened to unravel my resolve. The question that clung to my mind with cruel insistence was simple yet devastating. How does a father come to be banished by his own son? That question was an ache that burrowed deep into the marrow of my soul. I turned it over and over, examining every shadow and angle, as if understanding its shape would dull the pain. Yet the answer remained elusive, hidden beneath layers of denial, love, disappointment, and finally, bitter betrayal.
I cast my mind back to the years when Mariah and I labored tirelessly to give Mark a future we struggled to envision ourselves. College tuition, a mountain scaled on scraping wages, was one summit after another. The nights I spent working overtime, elbows burning, prayers whispered under my breath that the money would come through, were all part of a quiet sacrifice. Mariah's unwavering diligence, her hands roughened from toil, held our home steady in my absence. Together we knitted a tapestry of modest hopes around our son's bright-eyed dreams. I remembered the pride-swollen moment when Mark closed that university chapter, diploma in hand, the promise of a new beginning warming our hearts against countless hardships. Those memories were etched indelibly, yet now they felt distant, almost like echoes from a different life. The boy who once darted to me with scraped knees and boundless curiosity no longer existed in the man who had turned cold and disdainful. The arrogance in his eyes had replaced the warmth I once took for granted. This was no sudden flare of anger or misunderstanding born of fatigue or frustration. It was a calculated fracture, deliberate and deep. Mark's impatience and sense of entitlement had overtaken the relationship we had built over decades. In his mind, I was no longer a father, but a blockade to his desires, an inconvenient link to the past he wished to sever. Our home, our sanctuary that had welcomed laughter and tears, had become the setting for my exile. That house, worn by time and filled with the echoes of family life, held years of steady labor, climbing icy rooftops to fix leaks, cleaning gutters against stubborn winter rains, patching walls and coaxing life back into aged plumbing. Those memories were more than mere details. They were the embodiment of devotion, yet also a symbol of betrayal now crystallized. The juxtaposition of warmth turned to frost was a wound raw and relentless. I replayed Mark's cold demand to leave, the sharpness of his voice echoing darkly in my mind. The finality in those words stripped me bare. Though I wore a stoic front, beneath it lay a tempest of grief and disbelief. Yet amid that storm, clarity emerged like dawn breaking through heavy clouds. This was no accident, no passing resentment. It was intentional, a rejection born of greed and impatience, a cruel dismissal of years spent giving without question. I had been too patient, too forgiving. Now that patience had stiffened into resolve, a steel tempered by pain. I rested my hands on the rough tabletop, tracing invisible lines in the grain as my mind shifted focus from wound to weapon. My years as an engineer had honed a mind trained to dissect complexity, to assess and solve problems systematically. This was no different. I would unravel this betrayal through careful analysis and strategy, one precise step at a time. Pieces spilled into my thoughts. Mark's reckless expenditures, whispers of mismanaged funds, the cracks in his failing ventures. I recalled half-heard complaints, documents incongruent with the family's records, inconsistencies I had chosen to overlook until now. These were not mere rumors, but threads I intended to pull on until the entire fabric unraveled. Though the pain was visceral, I refused to let anger be my guide. Rash fury leads only to ruin. Calm calculation, the patience I had cultivated over decades, would be my ally. I would harness that patient fire into focused action. That night, sleep was a stranger. Shadows stretched across the creaking walls, the mind's restless maze filled with memories both tender and harsh. Maria's soft voice urging steadiness, Mark's hollow promises, my own fractured pride. But intertwined through it all was a quiet determination, a spark of purpose rekindled. Though the world beyond felt cold and indifferent, it was also a vast field of possibility. Here, justice could still be sought, debts repaid, balance restored. My exile was not an end, but a crucible. As dawn crept through the narrow window, bathing the room in pale light, I embraced the steady flame of resolve. I was no longer just a discarded father. I was a man ready to reclaim what had been lost, to protect a legacy stained by betrayal. The road was long and uncertain. The battles ahead would test every ounce of strength and cunning I possessed. Yet, with the memories of sacrifice as my shield and experience as my sword, I would confront them with patience and precision. This was my moment, not just to survive, but to fight back, to restore what was rightfully mine. Step by step, calculated and deliberate, I would walk this path, undeterred. The pain of the past would fuel the fire of repayment. My story was not yet finished. The sharp beep of the answering machine sliced through the stillness of the evening, its shrill tone jolting me from the heavy fog of sleepless thought. Fumbling with weary fingers, I pressed play. My heart clenched at the sight of Mark's name flashing on the little screen. His voice spilled out, cold and cutting, echoing the very rejection that had cast me out. "Dad, don't kid yourself. The house is under my name now. Foreclosure is coming, and I won't hesitate to take it. If you think you still have a say, you're dreaming." The arrogance behind those words was colder than any winter wind that had ever bitten my skin on raw mornings spent fixing the house roof. That was the final blow. The last hedge of his defiance meant to show dominance. A crude attempt to erase the years of labor, love, and sacrifice I had poured into keeping our family standing. I let the message hang in the silent room, feeling the cold burn deep in my chest, but beneath it, a slow hardening took shape. No longer was I the broken man who'd been forced out. I was a man forging steel from pain, turning quiet fury into relentless resolve. The house wasn't just a structure. It was the foundation of my life's work. I saw again the early mornings when I climbed ladder rungs slick with frost, patching leaks just as my bones ached. The late nights spent wrenching stubborn plumbing back to life. The endless days spent keeping our haven safe for my wife and son. And now it was under threat from the son I had raised, nurtured, and cherished. It settled deep within me that this was a battle I would meet with the same precision and patience that had guided me through decades of engineering problems. Taking things apart, examining every detail, and rebuilding them stronger. That was how I approached the complexities before me. Memories flickered. Ledgers balanced meticulously. Investments tracked and nurtured with care. Family assets watched over like precious cargo. Yet beneath that caution lay cracks I had once chosen to ignore. Mark's complaints about oversight, his evasive answers when asked about debts, the vague confusion around investments that were supposed to be growing but showed no return. Now, those cracks were the roadmap I would follow. I spent hours poring over every document accessible to me. Bills, tax forms, bank statements, all whispered of reckless spending, of hidden liabilities piling quietly as Mark sailed on, blithely ignoring the foundations crumbling beneath him. Now, those cracks were the roadmap I would follow. I spent hours poring over every document accessible to me. Bills, tax forms, bank statements, all whispered of reckless spending, of hidden liabilities piling quietly as Mark sailed on, blithely ignoring the foundations crumbling beneath him. Some investments were revealed as mirrors reflecting nothing but fiction, accounts with promises made but never kept. Each discovery tightened my resolve. This was more than carelessness. It was betrayal wrapped in arrogance, a recklessness that threatened to undo all I had built. With evidence gathering, I reconnected with an old attorney, a trusted friend from my business days. His steady, calm voice on the phone was a balm amidst the turmoil, reminding me that justice was a matter of strategy, not rage. Together, we sketched out plans, steps to freeze Mark's access to finances, to call for audits, to contest any unauthorized transactions threatening our family's legacy. Strategy became my shield. I reminded myself to wield patience as skillfully as a craftsman wields his tools. I had spent a lifetime calculating precise measurements and tolerances. I would now apply the same care and discipline to this fight. Late into the night, long after the world outside succumbed to sleep, I sat engulfed in the flicker of a single lamp. Papers were scattered across my desk, every scrap of information a piece of the puzzle. The room, cramped and shadowed, became a cathedral of resolve. I made calls to banks, accountants, and former business partners, carefully gathering intelligence. Each conversation was a delicate dance, questions posed with casualness that, hidden beneath, was my growing arsenal of knowledge. I listened for slips, voices unconvinced, fumbled facts that strengthened my case. While I moved steadily forward, Mark remained unaware or perhaps cavalier about the tempest building in the shadows. His calls became sporadic, increasingly terse and laced with frustration. Yet when we spoke, I met his veiled threats with calm steel, my voice steady, measured. I refused to give him the satisfaction of knowing he frightened me. I imagined his growing panic, the cracks appearing in the arrogant facade he had so confidently displayed. His belief that he held all power was eroding, piece by piece, unfurling beneath the invisible pressure I was applying. A quiet satisfaction began to root itself within me, not born from bitter vengeance, but from the slow, sure crafting of justice. Each uncovered truth, each falsified document exposed, became a stepping stone toward reclaiming my dignity and the legacy I had fought for. During the stillness of midnight, a faint smile crept onto my lips. The engineer's mind that once sought elegant solutions now dissected a far more personal problem. I was no longer the castaway. I was a tactician shaping a reckoning more inevitable than a storm. This fight was about far more than money or property. It was about honor, respect, and the years of sacrifice that had gone unacknowledged. It was about confronting the arrogance that thought entitlement trumped effort and that disdain could sever the ties of family. As dawn's first light sifted through the narrow window, casting pale shadows, I settled firmly into my resolve. The door to the life I knew may have closed, but I still held the map to reclaim it. Step by step, document by document, I would navigate this battle, unyielding, undeterred. The pain of betrayal now fueled the steady blaze within me, and my story was far from finished. The early morning light filtered weakly through the dusty window pane, casting pale, weary beams that seemed to echo the fatigue settling deep within my bones. Yet despite the exhaustion, I was fiercely awake, mind razor-sharp, focused, driven by the relentless pulse of purpose. The battle lines were drawn in ink and paper, in bank ledgers and legal briefs, and I was bent over my small desk, sifting through the endless tide of Mark's financial delusions and imposters. Each piece of correspondence, every bank statement, loan application, and investment summary carried a significance far beyond its mundane appearance. They were testaments of a deeper rot, evidence of a reckless hand that had gambled away our family's future. This was no mistake. It was a calculated betrayal spun from greed, arrogance, and impatience. And I, a man tempered by decades of engineering precision, was ready to break it all down and expose the truth. I held in my hands documentation that revealed falsified accounts, numbers manipulated to create illusions of wealth where there was none, investment portfolios that were nothing more than ghostly mirages, inflated with forged documents and padded statements, loans taken out without authorization, debts piling in shadows so thick they almost obscured the reality beneath. The facade Mark had constructed around our family assets was paper-thin, and each discovery was a chisel stroke weakening its foundation. Reaching out to my old attorney was one of the pivotal moves in this unfolding strategy. His voice over the phone was steady and unyielding, a beacon in the fog of betrayal. Together, we crafted detailed plans for legal intervention, motions to freeze accounts, petitions for forensic audits, steps to challenge unauthorized transactions. The process was painstaking, a chess game requiring patience with every calculated move, and I embraced it fully. As days bled into restless nights, I enlisted an old colleague with specialized forensic accounting skills. Through him, I began peeling back the layers of deception carefully laid into family financials. Every document scrutinized, every ledger double-checked. The more I uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Mark's grasp on the family's wealth was a brittle illusion, propped up by misrepresentations and lies. Working late into the night, I developed a rhythm, methodical and unyielding. The small rented room,
dimly lit and cluttered with papers, became my command center. Here, the war waged quietly but with unwavering ferocity. I cross-referenced transactions, combed through bank statements, and mapped out unauthorized withdrawals and transfers. The financial trail was erratic and reckless, revealing a pattern of disregard that stunned me anew with each discovery. I knew perfectly well the importance of restraint. One misstep, one reckless move could unravel all I had painstakingly pieced together. I measured every call carefully, spoke only when necessary, and kept my intentions cloaked behind calm professionalism. The list of contacts grew. Bank officials, accountants, legal advisors, even reluctant family members who had begun to sense that something hidden was unraveling. With each call, I gathered intelligence, noting conflicting statements, undocumented loans, and inconsistencies in Mark's explanations. Mark himself remained unbowed outwardly,
but the cracks in his facade grew visible. His terse phone calls no longer carried the unmistakable arrogance of a man in control. Instead, his voice bore hints of frustration, of panic barely restrained, as he realized the unseen net tightening around him. I met his challenges with cool clarity, never rising to anger, never betraying fear. His threats bounced off an immovable stone. In moments of quiet, I allowed a faint, bitter smile. Not born of malice, but of a deep satisfaction. The satisfaction of a careful plan coming to fruition, of justice taking shape. The arrogant son who believed entitlement replaced effort was being exposed, and the truth was an unyielding tide washing away his illusions. This was about more than money or possession. It was about the honor that had been trampled, the trust shattered, and the years of sacrifice dismissed. I had given everything to this family, and now I was reclaiming what was mine by right, not through hatred, but through conviction and perseverance. As the weeks passed, my efforts extended beyond mere documents. I sought out family members long sidelined, those who had turned a blind eye or been silenced by Mark's hubris. They were cautious at first, hesitant, but when presented with undeniable evidence, their skepticism began to soften. Quiet conversations in shadowed corners turned to whispered support. The family, fractured and bruised, was slowly waking to the truth. Despite the urgency of my mission, I never lost the composure honed over decades of problem-solving. Every move was deliberate, every step planned with care. I likened it to the methodical process of debugging a complex machine. Identify the flaw, isolate it, and repair systematically. This was my craft applied to betrayal. Through it all, Maria's memory was my compass. Her unwavering strength and gentle wisdom echoed in my mind, urging me onward when the weight of loneliness and the enormity of the task threatened to overwhelm. I imagined her smiling, steady beside me, a quiet force that bolstered my resolve. The legal preparations advanced steadily. Freeze orders cut off Mark's ability to move funds. Forensic audits began to reveal discrepancies that he could no longer conceal. Letters from my attorney began circulating among financial institutions and legal bodies, each one a brick in the fortress I was building to reclaim what was rightfully ours. There were moments of fatigue, times the burden pressed down like a physical weight. Yet even then, the flame of determination burned fiercely within. The battle demanded endurance alongside intelligence, strength tempered by patience. Sometimes I paused to gaze at the worn photographs scattered on my desk. Snapshots of happier times when family bonds were unbreakable. Those images fueled my determination, reminding me that restoration was possible, that hope could be forged anew from the ashes of betrayal. I envisioned the day when I would walk once again through the doors that had been closed behind me. The family home, not as a defeated man, but as one renewed and restored. A house not just reclaimed in ownership, but reborn in dignity and truth. Until that day came, I toiled quietly, tirelessly, weaving a web of evidence and alliances that could not be ignored. The house of lies Mark had built was creaking, splintering under exposure. I was patient, strategic, and relentless. The quiet rage locked in my chest was a fuel unlike any other, driving me through paperwork, legal wrangling, and countless hours of quiet investigation. I was no longer a victim cast out, but a man reclaiming his place, piece by calculated piece. With every frozen account, every audit report, every letter dispatched with painstaking care, I edged closer to the final reckoning. I was no longer alone in this fight. Family members, lawyers, accountants, and old friends rallied beside me, united by truth and the desire to see justice restored. As the days stretched onward, the facade Mark had maintained began to crumble irreversibly. The arrogance of youth and entitlement was meeting the unyielding wall of experience, patience, and truth. The tide was turning. In my quiet moments, I prepared not only for the battles ahead, but for the aftermath. I thought of the long road toward healing fractured relationships, rebuilding trust lost to greed and neglect. That journey would be as important as the fight itself. For now, though, the focus remained sharp and unwavering. Every detail mattered. Every reminder of past sacrifices, every document uncovered, was a step toward restoring balance and honor. I lit a cigarette, watching the smoke curl upward in the dim light. The city outside carried on obliviously, unaware of the quiet storm swirling in this cramped room. Yet, within these four walls, a man was reshaping his destiny, turning sorrow into strategy, betrayal into resolve. This was no longer simply a struggle for assets. It was a war for justice, respect, and the reclamation of a legacy that would not be erased. And I would see it through, to the end. The gray light of dawn seeped quietly into my small room, bringing with it no immediate relief but a steady reminder of the long road I was traversing. The digital clock blinked relentlessly, time moving with a resolute patience that mirrored my own. Every day blurred into the next, hours spent poring over documents, making calls, piecing together a complex puzzle woven from lies and denial. The weight of it all pressed on me, yet beneath the weariness, an unshakable flame glowed steady. That morning, like many before it, I sat hunched over a mountain of papers. Bank statements, invoices, loan records, and tax forms stretched before me like an endless labyrinth. Each detail mattered, each line a clue leading closer to truth. Mark's reckless spending, well hidden and often overlooked, now revealed itself in stark clarity. Overdrafts covered by quick fixes, loans taken without my consent or knowledge, investments inflated on paper but barren in reality. It was a betrayal so complete, so dense with deceit, that the shock lingered each time I uncovered a new piece. And yet, I had learned long ago not to let shock rule my actions. My years as an engineer had taught me discipline, strategy, and perseverance through complexity. Every finding was a new thread I pulled, unraveling the intricately tangled story Mark had spun to mask his wild excess and entitlement. My fingers trembled faintly as I dialed the number I had committed to memory. My old attorney, a man steady and wise, who had been a quiet ally for years. His calm voice was a balm in the storm, reassuring as we discussed legal avenues to wrest control from Mark's hands. Together, we plotted precise moves, freezing accounts, postponing loans, including hiring forensic accountants who could pierce the veil of falsified documents and reconstruct the truth for all to see. Each legal maneuver required patience. No rash or vengeful move would serve justice better than a firm, unyielding strategy. The process was slow, the waiting agonizing, but I drew strength from every minor victory. The bank's telephone call, confirming suspensions of Mark's credit lines and cars payments, stoked the embers of hope, reminding me that the fight was tangible, that the walls he'd built of lies were beginning to crack. Mark's reaction was as volatile as it was predictable. The once confident, arrogant son turned frantic and erratic, his phone calls ringing with veiled threats and desperation. Yet I met each with measured calm, refusing to give his fury room to infiltrate. I moved precisely through the maze of legalities, pressing forward with unrelenting resolve. Family dynamics shifted beneath the surface. Many relatives who had previously bowed to Mark's confidence began questioning the foundations of his stories. Whispers of doubt traveled quietly in social settings, doubts rooted in the evidence I was steadily bringing to light. The force of truth was fracturing old alliances, creating new currents in a sea long thought settled. Nights deepened into early dawns as I continued my vigilance. With the help of a skilled forensic accountant, intricate financial deceptions came to light. Accounts falsified, assets mislabeled, debts hidden behind elaborate paper trails. Each revelation was a clarion call. Here lay proof not just of financial mismanagement, but of a profound disregard for family honor and responsibility. Amidst the intensity of legal strategy and financial investigation, I found solace in recalling Maria's quiet strength. Her presence, though absent, served as a steady compass. Her unwavering belief in integrity and justice bolstered my spirit during moments when exhaustion threatened to claim me. I could almost hear her gentle voice urging patience, precision, and kindness even amidst relentless pursuit of fairness. With time, the consequences of my efforts began to ripple outward. Mark's access to critical funds tightened. His ventures staggered under mounting scrutiny. Business loans were frozen or postponed, forcing him into damage control that grew increasingly desperate and ineffectual. His public persona, once so sure and untouchable, began to fracture, revealing the hollowness beneath. I carefully documented every interaction, every letter sent and received, every testimony gathered. This archive was more than legal armor. It was a shield for truth, a growing monument to resilience. With every pass over the evidence, my conviction deepened. This was a reclamation not only of property, but of dignity and family legacy. Despite the advances, I remained aware of the emotional toll. The fractures within the family ran deep. Loyalists and skeptics wrestled with the painful truths emerging. Reconstruction, beyond legal battles, would demand empathy and reconciliation. I prepared myself for a painstaking journey of healing, knowing that justice was only the first step. My resolve was unwavering, my objectives clear. The slow erosion of Mark's false dominion was proof that patience, when paired with purpose, could topple even the most arrogant of fortified lies. The next phases would require the same level-headed determination I had maintained, but I welcomed the challenge. One chilly evening, as I sat beneath the dim lamp, I watched the smoke from a cigarette curl upward and dissipate into shadows. Outside, the city pulsed with indifferent life, oblivious to the storm brewing within these four walls. Inside me, however, a transformation was underway. Sorrow turned into strategy. Betrayal forged into unwavering resolve. The stakes extended far beyond monetary concerns. This was a stand for respect, for legacy, for the restoration of bonds nearly severed by hubris and greed. I was ready to see this through, to the bitter end if necessary, with a calm mind honed by hardship and an unyielding spirit tempered by decades of sacrifice. Though Mark's resistance persisted, his fire was dimming. Each frozen account, each legal hurdle, tightened the grip on his unraveling empire. I observed the crumbling with quiet satisfaction, knowing that with every patient move, the balance of power shifted inexorably. And so I stood, unwavering at the cusp of a reckoning years in the making. My mind focused, my heart steady. Every letter dispatched, every phone call made, was a step closer to reclaiming what was unjustly taken. Through steady calculation and relentless pursuit, I was rebuilding, not just a family's fortune, but its honor. The battle ahead would not be swift or simple, but that was a burden I could bear. My story was far from finished. It was a story of endurance, of quiet strength, of justice pursued with the tempered hand of a man who refused to be defeated. The morning of the family estate meeting arrived gray and uncertain, as if the sky itself mirrored the tension looming within the walls of the house that had long been the center of our lives. I stepped into that familiar space carrying more than just the weight of folders thick with evidence. I carried decades of memory, sacrifice, and unspoken hopes. My heart was steady. Years of careful preparation had led to this point, and there was no turning back. Relatives filtered in slowly, their expressions veiled with cautious anticipation. Some faces stirred warm memories, others echoed forgotten estrangements. Among them, Mark maintained a rigid posture, his once confident demeanor now strained and brittle. His gaze briefly met mine, a flicker of defiance flickering before shadows of doubt settled into his eyes. I took a deep breath and began. Not with anger or recrimination, but with the quiet clarity of truth laid bare. Slowly, I unfolded the facts spilled across decades of mismanagement and deceit. The manipulated accounts, the unauthorized loans, the assets squandered, all cataloged with patient care and presented as incontrovertible proof. I spoke of the sacrifices Maria and I had made, the long hours, the repairs, the steady stewardship of a family's future now threatened by reckless greed. As the details emerged, reactions shifted in waves. Disbelief flickered to shock, and shock softened into the painful acceptance of a betrayal too large to ignore. Mark's mask of arrogance cracked visibly, his defenses faltering under the weight of truth. He attempted responses, weaving excuses that fell flat before the overwhelming evidence. Voices rose, questions pressed. Conversations curled into harsh reality, the comfortable illusion shattered. Relatives who once supported Mark now hesitated, their loyalty strained, their faith tested by facts. The meeting descended into a fraught mixture of accusations, defenses, and sorrow. Yet underneath the discord was a shared understanding that the family's future demanded reckoning and change. When the gathering scattered, the air was thick with unspoken promises and tentative resolve. As I walked through the halls afterward, the echoes of laughter and love mingled uneasily with memories of conflict and loss. I paused before Maria's portrait, her calm gaze a balm to wounds still fresh. This was no mere battle for property, but a fight to restore honor and rebuild a fractured home. Her presence, even in stillness, fortified me. The nights that followed brought little rest. Exhausted yet relentless, I moved to consolidate what we had begun, working with lawyers, accountants, and family alike to untangle ownership and secure the estate from further damage. It was slow work, threaded with legal complexities and emotional rifts demanding delicate handling. In private moments, I reached out to relatives divided by years of silence and hurt. Conversations were often tentative, laden with caution, but underscored by a desire, sometimes hesitant, to heal. These exchanges, difficult as they were, held the promise of repair. Maria's memory remained my compass through these challenges, her wisdom an unseen hand guiding every decision. Her belief in justice and compassion steadied me through weariness and doubt. I carefully documented every step: legal proceedings, financial reconciliations, family talks, crafting a record that was both armor and testament. The scars of betrayal were deep, but not insurmountable.
Healing would be a journey, not a moment. In the garden she once tended, I found solace amidst blooming life and gentle breeze. The house stood resolute, its foundations old but sturdy, now bathed in the light of truth restored. This was a home reborn, no longer shadowed by deceit. Though the path ahead stretched long and uncertain, I embraced it with steady resolve. The fight had been fierce, but the victory was more than legal. It was ethical, familial, and profoundly personal. The honor reclaimed was not just mine, but belonged to all who cherished truth and bond. As evening fell, I sat beneath the warm glow of familiar lamps, smoke from a cigarette lazily curling upward in the quiet air. Outside, the city's indifferent pulse moved on, unaware of the battles waged and won within these walls. This was more than struggle. It was restoration, a testament to endurance born of love and hard-won justice. The family legacy, once threatened by greed and betrayal, was now safeguarded by truth and reconciliation. And so, I held a silent vow to carry this restored honor forward, not with pride or triumph, but with humility and steadfast care. The journey was far from over, but the foundations were secure. The future waited patiently, built on the resilience of truth and the quiet strength of those who dare to fight for it. In the stillness of the garden Maria once carefully tended, I found a rare moment of peace among the blooms and gentle rustling leaves. The house itself, weathered and worn, stood firm, as if it had absorbed our pain and carried it silently through the years. Now, bathed in the soft light of truth restored, it felt more like a beacon than a battleground, a shelter where the wounds inflicted might finally begin to heal. The road ahead was not promised to be easy or swift. Fractured relationships and hardened hearts could not be mended overnight. But beneath the surface of those broken ties, I sensed a thread of cautious hope, a desire among those I had once reached out to for conversation to begin the slow work of reconciliation. There were apologies whispered through hesitant words, memories shared with fragile trust, and in these moments the possibility of repair flickered like a fragile flame. Maria's memory was my guide throughout this long process. Though she was no longer here, her spirit remained vivid, a quiet strength steering my decisions, reminding me that justice was as much about compassion as it was about righting wrongs. Her unwavering belief in fairness lent me the courage to face both the harshness of betrayal and the gentleness required for true healing. Every step I took was careful and measured. I kept detailed records of legal proceedings and family discussions, creating a tapestry of evidence not just to protect what was mine, but to offer clarity to those still uncertain. The scars left behind by greed and ingratitude were deep and jagged, but I was learning to see healing as a journey, one that required patience, persistence, and sometimes painful truth. Walking through the rooms I once called home, I felt a calmness that had been absent for so long. This house was more than wood and stone. It was a vessel of legacy and a monument to resilience. The deceit that had threatened to shatter everything was pushed back, replaced by a quiet dignity that honored the sacrifices made and the love that had built this foundation. Though the challenges ahead were many, I embraced them, bolstered by the knowledge that the fight was now greater than legal titles or possessions. It was the restoration of honor, to myself, to my family, and to Maria's memory. The victory was a shared one, belonging not only to me, but to all who value truth and the bonds of kinship. As night fell, I settled into a familiar chair, the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows that danced gently on the walls. The smoke from my cigarette drifted lazily upward, curling into the still air like whispered prayers. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the quiet wars waged and won in this modest home. Yet within me, a profound contentment settled, born not of triumph, but of hard-won peace. This was no simple struggle of possession or pride. It was a testament to endurance, to love weathered through hardship, and to the power of justice sought with a steady, unyielding hand. The legacy I fought to protect was more than wealth. It was the embodiment of our family's soul and the hope that it might endure beyond me. In the quiet night, I made a silent vow to carry this renewed honor forward, not with arrogance or pride, but with humility and careful stewardship. The journey was far from finished. The foundation was laid, but the building of trust and unity would take time. The future stretched before me, a vast, open expanse shaped by the resilience of those who refused to surrender to bitterness or despair. Even as I faced the uncertainty ahead, I felt strengthened by the passage through darkness into light. The cost of ingratitude, I knew too well, was steep and unforgiving. Yet in confronting it, I had found not only justice, but a deeper understanding of the fragile human heart. And in that, there was hope. Hope for redemption, for forgiveness, and for a peace that could one day truly heal us all. I breathed deeply, settling into the calm that only comes after storms. The night wore on quietly, and in that stillness I found the strength to carry on, to protect, to nurture, and to renew. This was the inheritance I would pass on, a legacy tempered by pain but brightened by truth and the unwavering courage to fight for what is right.